September 15, 1944. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt sat in his headquarters near Paris, staring at intelligence reports that made no sense. The numbers had to be wrong. They had to be. Around the oak table, his staff officers shuffled through documents with the quiet desperation of men confronting an impossible reality. For 3 years, German military planners had calculated American capabilities with Prussian precision. They had analyzed industrial statistics, studied organizational charts, and observed training exercises. Their conclusion was unanimous and catastrophic in its wrongness. America was soft, undisciplined, and militarily insignificant. That assessment was about to be obliterated by mathematical reality, so overwhelming that it would redefine warfare itself. The meeting began with what should have been routine logistics briefings. Colonel Heinrich Weber, the intelligence officer, opened a folder containing production statistics from American factories. His voice carried the weight of a man delivering a death sentence. In the past month alone, American shipyards had launched more cargo vessels than Germany possessed in its entire merchant fleet. American aircraft factories were producing bombers at rates that exceeded Germany's total annual output. American tank production numbers suggested assembly line methods that treated armored fighting vehicles like automobiles. Weber paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected his own disbelief. These weren't estimates or propaganda figures. These were confirmed numbers, verified through multiple intelligence sources, cross-referenced with captured documents, and validated by German agents still operating in neutral countries. The mathematics were undeniable and terrifying. Rundstedt interrupted with the question every officer was thinking: how was this possible? Germany possessed the most advanced industrial economy in Europe. German factories had been mobilized for total war production since 1939. German engineers were building jet aircraft, rocket weapons, and submarines that represented the cutting edge of military technology. Yet these reports suggested that American industrial capacity exceeded German production by factors of 3, 4, even 5 to 1 in critical categories. The implications rippled through the room like shockwaves. If America could produce weapons and equipment at these rates while simultaneously supplying Britain and the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease, then the fundamental assumptions underlying German strategy were not just wrong, but catastrophically so. The war was not a contest between German efficiency and Allied numbers. It was a contest between German resources and American industrial might so vast it defied comprehension. Colonel Weber continued his briefing with details that made the situation even worse. American logistics operated on principles that violated every German assumption about military efficiency. Where German quartermasters calculated minimum necessary supplies and distributed them with precision, Americans stockpiled enormous quantities at every level, accepting waste as preferable to any possibility of shortage. German supply officers had discovered American depot facilities containing more ammunition than entire German army groups possessed, more fuel than German divisions received in months, more spare parts than German mechanics had seen in years. The mechanization differences were equally staggering. German forces in 1944 still moved primarily on foot and by horse-drawn transport. Only elite divisions were fully motorized, and even those depended on captured vehicles and increasingly scarce fuel. The entire German army in the West possessed perhaps 2,000 operational tanks and assault guns, carefully husbanded and deployed only in critical sectors. Intelligence reports indicated that American forces in France had deployed over 10,000 tanks, with more arriving continuously. Every American combat unit from division headquarters down to company level was fully motorized with standardized vehicles. When American divisions needed to relocate, they loaded into trucks and drove. When German divisions needed to move, they marched on foot for days, arrived exhausted, and required rest before entering combat. Rundstedt absorbed these numbers with the growing realization that Germany was fighting an entirely different kind of war than anyone had imagined. This wasn't a contest between competing military doctrines or training philosophies. This was a demonstration of industrial capacity so overwhelming that traditional military calculations became meaningless. Major General Franz Halder, recently recalled from forced retirement to serve as an advisor, presented the most disturbing analysis of all American forces operated under assumptions that would have seemed insane to German logistics officers. Artillery ammunition was fired not in carefully rationed amounts, but in barrages that consumed more shells in hours than German divisions received in weeks. When American infantry encountered resistance, they called for artillery support, air support, tank support, and naval gunfire if available, then waited while overwhelming firepower reduced enemy positions before advancing. This approach struck German observers as wasteful, even cowardly. It seemed like the behavior of troops who lacked confidence in their infantry skills and compensated with excessive firepower. Yet, it was undeniably effective, allowing American forces to advance while taking fewer casualties than comparable German operations. They ground forward through the hedgerows of Normandy slowly but inexorably, while German defenders exhausted their limited ammunition stocks and received minimal replacements. The contrast revealed fundamental differences in how the two militaries approached warfare. German logistics operated on carefully calculated sufficiency, determining minimum requirements and maximizing combat power while minimizing waste. This system worked brilliantly when supply lines functioned properly and front lines remained stable. American logistics operated on abundance and redundancy, treating supply flow as something to be maximized rather than optimized. German quartermasters looked at American supply dumps with disbelief, seeing mountains of equipment that violated every principle of efficient military logistics. Yet this approach meant American units almost never faced supply shortages, could operate at full intensity indefinitely, and could afford tactical methods that required enormous material consumption. The mobility differential was equally decisive. American forces could concentrate faster, exploit breakthroughs more rapidly, and sustain operational tempo that German forces simply could not match. When breakthrough operations succeeded, American armored divisions poured through gaps at maximum speed, bypassing resistance and driving deep into German rear areas with a recklessness that somehow proved devastatingly effective. Rundstedt studied reconnaissance photographs showing American supply convoys stretching for miles along French roads. The Red Ball Express truck convoys delivered thousands of tons of supplies daily along dedicated routes, maintaining American operations at the end of supply lines that would have been considered impossibly extended by German standards. The logistical achievement represented engineering and organizational capabilities that seemed to transcend normal military constraints. As the briefing concluded, the German officers faced an uncomfortable truth. They had assumed American industrial capacity would translate into better equipment, but not fundamentally different operational capabilities. They had expected to face Americans who fought like Europeans, but with more resources. Instead, they confronted a military system that had weaponized industrial economy in ways that made traditional measures of effectiveness obsolete. The day Germany learned America was built different was not one dramatic revelation, but a cascade of realizations that accumulated like hammer blows. Each intelligence report, each battlefield encounter, each captured document added another piece to a puzzle that revealed an opponent whose capabilities exceeded not just German resources, but German imagination. In that headquarters near Paris, as autumn shadows lengthened across maps showing the inexorable American advance, German military leaders began to understand they faced something unprecedented in military history. Not just a better equipped enemy, but an entirely different approach to warfare itself. The breaking point came during Operation Cobra in late July 1944, when German commanders witnessed something that shattered every remaining assumption about American military capabilities. What they observed was not just tactical competence or superior equipment, but the systematic application of industrial thinking to the ancient art of war itself. General Heinrich Eberbach, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, watched through his field glasses as American forces prepared their breakout from the Normandy beachhead. What he saw defied every principle of military economy that had guided German operations since the beginning of the war. American bombers appeared overhead in formations so massive they darkened the sky. Not dozens of aircraft, but thousands, dropping explosives with a density that transformed the landscape itself. The preliminary bombardment alone consumed more ordnance than German forces received in entire months. Eberbach counted explosion after explosion, calculating ammunition expenditure that exceeded his army's total allocation for the year. Yet this was merely preparation. When American ground forces advanced, they moved behind artillery barrages that maintained the same impossible intensity, shell after shell falling with mechanical precision until German defensive positions simply ceased to exist. The tactical execution was methodical, almost boring in its systematic efficiency. American infantry didn't charge heroically into machine gun fire. They called for support, waited while overwhelming firepower eliminated resistance, then advanced to the next objective where the process repeated. It struck German observers as cautious, even unimaginative, but it worked with terrifying consistency, grinding forward regardless of German tactical skill or defensive preparation. Within hours, American armored columns were pouring through gaps in German lines that had been considered impregnable just days before. These weren't desperate breakthrough attempts that German forces could contain through counterattack. They were industrial operations, treating battlefield obstacles like manufacturing problems to be solved through superior resources and systematic application of force. Colonel Hans Speidel, serving as Rundstedt's chief of staff, received field reports that read like fiction. American tank columns were advancing not cautiously, but at maximum speed, covering distances in hours that German forces required days to traverse. When German units attempted to establish blocking positions, American reconnaissance aircraft appeared immediately, followed by fighter bombers that destroyed defensive preparations before they could be completed. The pursuit across France in August revealed American operational capabilities that seemed to violate fundamental laws of military logistics. Armored divisions maintained combat effectiveness while operating hundreds of miles from their supply bases, sustained by convoy systems that delivered fuel and ammunition with clockwork reliability. German forces attempted to establish defensive lines along successive rivers, only to discover American engineers had already constructed bridges, and American forces were advancing on the opposite bank. Intelligence officers, analyzing captured American documents, discovered operational assumptions that explained these impossible achievements. American planners calculated ammunition requirements at 2 to 3 times the rates German doctrine considered maximum sustainable consumption. American maintenance procedures called for replacing equipment rather than repairing it, treating complex military hardware as essentially disposable items to be discarded when damaged. American personnel policies rotated experienced combat veterans to training positions, bringing fresh troops to frontline units rather than preserving veteran formations. Every practice violated German assumptions about efficient military operations. Yet, the cumulative effect was an army that operated at intensity levels German forces could achieve only briefly before requiring operational pauses to rest and refit. The mathematical implications became undeniable as German commanders calculated loss rates against replacement capacity. Every engagement resulted in net losses for German forces, even when tactical outcomes appeared favorable. Equipment abandoned during retreats could not be recovered. Casualties could not be replaced at rates matching combat consumption. Fuel and ammunition allocations decreased monthly, while American stockpiles seemed to grow continuously. Field Marshal Walter Model, recalled from the Eastern Front to command German forces in the West, submitted reports that documented the systematic destruction of German military power through simple attrition. His forces were fighting competently. His officers were tactically skilled. His defensive preparations were professionally executed. None of this mattered against an enemy that could sustain operations indefinitely, while German units exhausted themselves through combat. The pursuit revealed American logistics capabilities that transcended European understanding of military possibility. The famous Red Ball Express convoy system operated with precision that German quartermasters found incomprehensible, delivering thousands of tons daily along routes that stretched across France. American supply dumps contained more material than entire German armies possessed, stockpiled with redundancy that treated waste as acceptable rather than catastrophic. When German forces overran abandoned American positions, they discovered equipment caches that revealed the true scale of American abundance ammunition stockpiles that could have sustained German operations for months were left behind as operationally insignificant. Vehicle parks contained more trucks than German divisions had seen since the beginning of the war. Medical supplies, communications equipment, and spare parts were abandoned in quantities that suggested American forces operated under entirely different resource constraints. Model's intelligence officers calculated that American replacement rates exceeded German casualties, meaning the balance of forces grew more unfavorable with each passing day, regardless of German tactical performance. American divisions destroyed in combat were reconstituted within weeks and returned to frontline service. German divisions destroyed in combat disappeared permanently from the order of battle. The speed of American operations created cascading effects that German defenders could not counter through traditional methods. When breakthrough occurred, American forces didn't pause to consolidate gains or establish secure supply lines. They drove forward at maximum velocity, accepting risks that German commanders would have considered suicidal, yet somehow maintaining cohesion and combat effectiveness across distances that should have resulted in operational collapse. German attempts to counterattack these extended columns met American air power in strengths that seemed unlimited. Fighter bombers appeared within minutes of German movement, destroying vehicles with precision that suggested complete aerial surveillance of the battlefield. When German commanders attempted to coordinate responses through radio communications, American signals intelligence intercepted their transmissions, and American raids disrupted their headquarters before operations could be executed. The systematic nature of American destruction impressed German professional officers, even as it frustrated them. Americans had reduced warfare to processes that could be standardized and replicated, creating military effectiveness through institutional methods rather than individual excellence. Training systems produced competent soldiers quickly through systematic instruction. Logistics employed assembly line thinking to move supplies efficiently. Maintenance used standardized parts and replacement procedures that minimized downtime. The entire American military system seemed designed to function effectively with ordinary personnel rather than requiring extraordinary soldiers. This offended German military culture, which valued individual skill and martial tradition, yet proved devastatingly effective at generating sustained combat power that could outlast any opponent regardless of their tactical superiority or fighting spirit. By September 1944, German commanders understood they faced mathematical inevitability rather than military defeat in any traditional sense. American industrial capacity had been weaponized into operational capabilities that made German tactical excellence strategically irrelevant. The war had become a production contest disguised as military operations, and American productive capacity exceeded German resources by margins so vast that no amount of fighting skill could bridge the gap. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944 represented Germany's final attempt to prove that tactical brilliance could overcome industrial mathematics. Hitler had gambled everything on a desperate winter assault, concentrating Germany's last operational reserves for one massive strike designed to split Allied forces and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. For German commanders, this wasn't just another military operation. It was a test of whether European military tradition could still triumph over American industrial warfare. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt watched the initial reports with cautious optimism. German forces had achieved complete tactical surprise, smashing through American lines in the early morning darkness of December 16th. Entire American units were surrounded and captured. The advance penetrated deeper than any German operation since 1940, creating a dangerous bulge in Allied positions that threatened to reach the Meuse River within days. For 48 hours, it seemed like the old magic still worked. German panzer spearheads raced through the Ardennes forests, bypassing strongpoints and driving toward strategic objectives with the speed and audacity that had conquered Poland and France. American forces appeared confused and disorganized, falling back in disorder as German columns exploited gaps in their defenses. Intelligence reports suggested panic in Allied headquarters, desperate attempts to understand where the attack was coming from and how to stop it. Then reality reasserted itself with crushing mathematical precision. The first indication came from Bastogne, where surrounded American paratroopers refused to surrender despite being outnumbered and cut off from supplies. German commanders had expected quick capitulation from troops facing hopeless odds. Instead, American defenders held their positions with determination that German veterans recognized from their own desperate stands on the Eastern Front. These weren't the soft, undisciplined soldiers German propaganda had described. They were professionals who understood their mission and intended to complete it regardless of personal cost. More disturbing were the American reinforcements that began appearing with impossible speed. Within 72 hours of the initial attack, entire divisions were converging on the threatened sector from positions hundreds of miles away. German staff officers calculated movement rates and concluded the reports had to be exaggerated. No military force could redeploy major formations across such distances in winter weather while maintaining unit cohesion and combat readiness. The calculations were correct. The reports were not exaggerated. General Omar Bradley's headquarters had redirected the entire Third Army northward in a logistical maneuver that German planners would have considered impossible, even under ideal conditions. General George Patton's forces executed a 90-degree turn involving over 250,000 men and their equipment, moving through snow-covered roads to strike the southern flank of the German advance. The operation required coordination between thousands of vehicles, precise timing of fuel deliveries, and communication networks that functioned flawlessly despite winter storms and German interference. When weather cleared on December 23rd, the true scope of American capabilities became devastatingly apparent. The sky filled with Allied aircraft in numbers that exceeded every German estimate of available strength. Fighter bombers, medium bombers, and heavy bombers appeared in coordinated waves, attacking German columns with precision that suggested complete battlefield surveillance roads became killing grounds where German vehicles burned in endless columns stretching back toward the Rhine. The systematic destruction of German logistics revealed American operational thinking that treated enemy supply lines like industrial targets to be eliminated through overwhelming application of force. Every bridge, every fuel dump, every ammunition depot became the focus of air attacks that consumed more ordnance in hours than German forces had fired during their entire advance. American air power wasn't being used tactically to support ground operations. It was being employed strategically to sever German forces from their supply bases and leave them stranded in hostile territory without fuel, ammunition, or reinforcements. Germany's most experienced commanders finally understood they had been fighting the wrong war entirely. This wasn't a contest between competing military philosophies or tactical doctrines. It was an encounter with industrial warfare so systematically overwhelming that traditional concepts of military excellence became strategically meaningless. America hadn't just mobilized an army, it had weaponized an entire continental economy into a military machine that could afford to be wasteful, redundant, and methodical, because its productive capacity exceeded the imagination of European military planners. The day Germany learned America was built different was the day warfare itself changed forever. September 1944 marked not just tactical defeat, but the obsolescence of everything German military culture had valued for centuries. In those intelligence reports and battlefield encounters, German officers discovered they faced mathematical inevitability disguised as military operations. America had solved war like an engineering problem.